Welcome to the Writing Gals, where we are four sweet romance authors staying up late. And it is late. So I may have taken a half an hour nap before we started because I was like dying. And my husband was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm okay." So welcome. We're glad you're here. We're glad you are surviving. And we can't wait to talk a little bit about writing because that is what we all love in the chaos in our lives. So let's talk about what we're doing. And let's start with Victorine. Why don't you tell us what you're up to?
All right. I am finishing a novel within the next 5 days because it's on pre-order and I have to get it up. But I'm almost done. And I'm at the black moment. It's starting right now. And I love that part of the book where you get to write the torture of the characters in their black moment. It's the funnest part, and Michelle's like, "No." She hates that part. But I love it. So I am almost done and super excited to share this novel with everybody because it's, I feel, a really strong, solid romantic comedy novel. So super excited for it.
And very exciting. All right, Michelle, what are you up to?
I also am finishing a book, and I am about to have a great kiss scene right before my black moment, and then I'll look forward to getting back to my last and final resolution and kiss scene at the end, because those are the fun parts to write, guys, not the black moments. But I will get through mine. I make them happen, mostly, for the most part. And then, so I've been doing that, and then I keep cheating on my story. I started another new story. It's so bad. I mean, the story I think is really good, but I mean, my cheating is bad because I just am not writing enough words per day to make this feasible. Like, I just am going to have to get my word count up so I can do all these fun stories I want to write. If I am messing with my eye through the whole podcast, I am super sorry, but I don't know if my eyelashes, I don't know what's going on, but it's like they're tangled, and every time I blink, they like stick. So just warning you, I will be.
She has super long eyelashes that we're all really done with them.
That problem.
I don't even have makeup on today.
It's driving me insane. So I'm just going to try a little bit of my accent came out there. Okay. So that's what I'm doing. And yeah, that's me.
All right. Judy, what are you up to?
So I am hoping to finish, well, I'm like working on my novella still. I'm probably about almost 15,000 words into it. It needs to be 20 to 25,000 words. So I'm hoping to finish it by like this time next week at the latest, because I have to have it to my editor by June 1st. So, but yeah, it's going well. I'm trying to just become more of a pantser than I have ever been, and just letting the story come, because I've realized it goes that way anyway. So that's what I'm doing, and yeah, hopefully it'll all turn out good.
You'll do awesome. And I am right with Michelle and Judy because we are part of a USA Today bestselling run. And so we all have to write novellas for it. And we're all pretty much like neck and neck for getting it done. I feel like there's so many other authors in the group who are like, "I already finished." And me and Michelle and Judy are like, "Wow, we haven't even started yet."
We all knew it was going to be that way, though, just because of our schedules leading up to it. Yeah.
So I am writing that and learning that my life is chaotic and is hard, but I get up in the morning and I write 2,000 words, less than what I normally have written in the past, but we are still elbow deep in remodels in our house. So my mornings consist of writing, and then my afternoons consist of putting up baseboards and painting and putting up tiling and trying to learn how to do all of this stuff. But I have a couple more pre-orders that I have to get in, plus some co-written books that I need to write. So I'm like, I cannot fall behind. So I have to get something out all the time and not try to fall asleep. You know what I noticed today too? I think I was so tired that I kept putting periods instead of commas in all my work. And I was just like, why did I put a period there? This is like the middle of a sentence. This doesn't make any sense. So... But you know what? Words are coming. They're getting out. I was really excited because with this novella, I really wasn't sure what was going to happen. And novellas are harder, right? Because you can't put a lot of the other stuff in it. And in my story, they're in a fishing competition. So they're literally just sitting next to each other on a pier trying to fish. And so it's very interesting trying to keep the story going, and but basically just with conversations. But then today I figured out this was the nice moment when you can be like, oh, I know what I'm going to write the rest of the book. Like, I know this scene needs to happen, and then this scene needs to happen, and then it'll be the end. And so I kind of had that moment. So hopefully things will be going a lot faster. If I can just get writing done faster, then I will be better and life will be better. So anyways, tonight we're going to keep it short and simple. We're just going to have a discussion amongst the four of us. Someone asked a question, comparing your recent writing to your first works, what have been your most notable improvements? So we thought we would just kind of chat about that. If you feel like you've had some notable improvements and you were watching this live, go ahead and comment. We'd love to hear what you guys think. But let's start with Victorine, and let's see what you have to say.
I'm glad I'm first, because then I can say whatever and I'm not repeating anybody else. So I was thinking back to my early works, and I think the most notable improvement has been with character arc. I really didn't understand character arc when I first started writing. I didn't understand all the stuff that your characters need. They need wants and desires, and not to have that fulfilled, and all that stuff. Plus all the backstory and everything else wrapped up in it. So I do my characters way better now than I did when I first started. The other thing that I thought of was just my author voice has really improved. I've found my author voice. I really didn't know what the author voice was at first, and so it took several books to kind of get that going and learn what my author voice is. But I can also find the voice of my characters easier now than I could at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Anybody else feel like their character arcs have gotten better since when they first started? Judy's nodding. Do you want to expound?
Yeah. Well, I like when I first started writing, I just made my characters like perfect and no flaws, and they didn't need a character arc because they were already perfect, and so they didn't like grow through it. And so then I later realized that flaws can make a person interesting, and that it's good and it shows growth. So that's something I've done as well.
So let's say there's somebody who's watching this and is saying, okay, that is something I struggle with, and in my future works is something that I want to see get better. How would you suggest that they work on their character arc? Michelle, take it away.
Oh, I just got assigned to answer some. That's awesome. Actually, when I look at new books, books by new authors, like in critique or something like that, almost always their stories would benefit if they would step back and just say, what does my character want, and what is in the way of them getting that? Mm-hmm. You know, and it's got to be driven by character goals and needs. And so often you just come up with a cool character or a cool idea, and that's not enough to drive a story. So if you look at the characters in your book, if you look at any of them individually, they could just be a really cool person, someone you'd want to hang out with or make you laugh, or you'd want to be friends with, but it doesn't drive a story. And so before you make anything else about your character, you really need, like, as far as like their hair color or like, all those fun things, is figure out what they need and want and what's in the way of them getting it. And part of knowing what they need and want, of course, is knowing what happened in their past to make them want and need that thing. So you can learn a lot about that whole process in Story Genius. It's a great resource for just learning how to get into that whole dynamic response your character has to their past that is then determining the whole plot of the rest of the book. So
awesome.
I totally agree with that. And another thing that I never thought of before reading that book, Story Genius by Lisa Cron, is giving your character a misconception or a lie that they believe that they have to realize throughout the book at some point that this is not the truth, and I've always believed it, and they have to come to that realization. And I second Michelle's recommendation of Story Genius.
And I think if you're looking for that question or that lie, a lot of times you can find, if you know the tropes you're writing, you could find out lies that a character could believe according to that trope. Like, for example, if they're a jilted bride, let's say that's your trope you're using. Well, you could use, I am not worthy of love, or I will never find love, as a lie that they can tell themselves. So if that's something that you're struggling with, because you're like, well, how do you figure that out? That might be a way for you to figure out this, that lie. Because sometimes I think when we say things, it sounds really good until you have to put it into practical use. And then you're like, I don't know how to do that. That sounds way more complicated or kind of out in the air, fluffy stuff than what people, then if you can break it down and say, well, if you know your trope, then you can find out your lies.
Yeah. And we talked about it in our theme episode a few weeks back, because it all relates back to theme. The theme is what you're trying to say with your story. And that theme is driven by the lie that your character believes, and they learn the theme, whatever your theme message is, throughout the book, and that's their character arc. So before we move on from characters, I was going to say one more thing that it's changed about my writing is that my first characters were me, if that makes sense. Like, they were, my female characters especially, of course, were basically me on the page. And I think that's okay. I kind of had to get that out of my system before I could move on from it. But now when I'm writing my books, I love to explore different personalities that I have and just a different kind of character. And so I don't have that problem any longer with my characters being almost carbon copies of myself.
Mm-hmm. I would have to agree. Mine too.
My first book was totally like me and my husband as a love interest. Like, that's the most, they're the most like us. And my sister-in-law one time read it and she said, I was totally picturing you and your husband kissing during all the kissing scenes. I'm like, oh, don't picture that.
Okay, that's a little weird, but yeah.
No, my husband gets asked in his office if he's the inspiration for all my like kissing scenes and stuff like that. Poor guy.
So since we're talking about kissing scenes, I would have to say one of the biggest changes is my kissing scenes have gotten a lot better since when I first started writing. And I don't know, I think it's because I wasn't sure how to write a kiss scene or how to make it good, or it was just, you put their two lips together and then it's done. And that's how like a paragraph used to fill up my kiss scenes, and now like pages. I have pages of kiss scenes. So I think that, the more you get to write them, the more you play around with them, the better you get, I think, at them. And I think when you go into watching a show or reading a book or watching a movie now as a writer, I'm always focusing on, where is he putting his hands? Where is she putting her hands? What is he? Oh gosh, there's this Korean drama. There's this one. I want to watch it, Tempted by Love, but I can't find it anywhere. But they kiss, and then he pulls away and he like rubs his thumb against her bottom lip. And I was like, okay, I've got to put that in a book because that's super hot. So, but you start to kind of pick up on all these things and you want to add them into your story. And I think also not being scared about getting into the passion of a kiss, because sometimes I think we're flirting that line between, because I write sweet romance and I'm like, no, as long as, other things are not being talked about, I'm more than happy to write a little bit more passion into my kisses. And Judy's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why we read. Come on.
Yeah.
I think that's a general thing with your writing as you get better, is you learn how to really dig into the details of what you're writing in a way that's like in an effective way. Not just things that don't matter, but the things that really bring out the emotions and the tactile feelings and the senses. Because when you first get through it, you're almost repeating what you've read other places and just kind of whitewashing it. But as you get better and better, you learn how to really make that experience happen for the reader. And
I think too, it's not like pages and pages of a kiss scene. I mean, more like the buildup, the moment when they're next to each other and you can start to feel, and then like, it's not just they kiss and pull apart. Like maybe they kiss for a second and then pull apart and talk and then they go back to kissing. Like you get to play a lot more into that emotion than just they kissed and then they keep apart.
Yeah, you understand more what makes it powerful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And not just like expecting the kiss to be exciting because it's a kiss. You realize that you have to put a lot of work in to the whole lead up, like you were saying, to really make it memorable.
The best compliment anyone can give me is when they always are like, "Whoa, Amy, that was an intense kiss scene," and I'm like, "Yes, I did it right. Good. That was my pitch." Sometimes I'm like, I really hope people aren't picturing me and my husband when they're reading this. But whatever. If that's what you think.
Hopefully, I'm just a vague name on the cover of the book to most of my readers.
Yeah, they have their own something. Judy, you were nodding. Go ahead.
Nope, it's okay.
You were nodding a lot. Do you have anything you want to add to?
Oh,
to
just
that?
I agree. I think my kissing scenes were always kind of like that because I'd read books that had really good kissing scenes, so like I knew I wanted to always do that. But yeah, the build up is definitely like that's like my favorite part, to build that anticipation. But actually for me, like kissing scenes have gotten like harder or more tedious the more I've written them, and they're not like as
You
fun.
expect more of yourself.
Yeah, because I'm like, well, I did such a good job on those other ones, and like I don't know, I have people like saying, Judy's kissing scenes are amazing, and I'm like, oh, I have to do another one. It's so hard. I don't know, and it has to be
Tell me
different.
everything is mediocre, and then I'll be satisfied.
So so just trying to come up with kisses that aren't always the same.
Well, and it's different if you write one book a year, right? But if you write 2 a year, probably 4. Oh, really? You're better than me so far this year. But yeah, the more you write, the more it feels like, okay, I gotta, do something different and fresh and better if you can than the one you did before.
I would say that's probably my biggest fear, is that my kissing scenes are like, oh, well, I read them do that in the last book. Like that's I do have that fear. But I'm like, there's only so many ways you can write it.
Yeah.
Because it always ends up with them just touching their lips together. So there's not a whole lot beyond that you can do.
Yeah. But you just kind of create this bucket list that you pick up from different like movies or shows or books or, whatever. And you kind of like, ooh, I want to do that thing. Kind of like Amy was just talking about. I have this, I don't know. I have this crazy thing that I saw a guy in a movie with like a tear, like a water droplet hanging from the lobe of his ear. I was like, oh my gosh, like to kiss a water drop off of somebody's earlobe. I just think like
wet. Are you sure?
No, it's like water. It came out of like a pool, or it was in a rainstorm or something like that. I was like, that needs to go in a kiss someday. Like, but you just kind of add things to your bucket list. And then when the story's right, you kind of have this reservoir of, wish list items you want to put in there. Man, get us talking about kissing. We'll just go all night.
Yeah, we will. Okay, let's talk about another one. Michelle, you want to add one of your own?
Yeah, so the thing that I used to struggle with really badly was transitioning through time. So I had a hard time, okay, well, this scene just ended, so now she's got to go to bed, and then she's got to get up in the morning, and she's got to have breakfast and get ready and finally go to work. And I had a really hard time just like skipping over the unimportant things so that I could, move on to what really mattered. In fact, it's kind of funny because I pulled up my first published book ever, and it was the first book I ever read. And I have a 1-star review on there. So they were all like really good reviews, and they got this 1 star because the person was comparing it to one of my later books. So I just thought it would be kind of fun to read. And it mentions this a little bit because they make it stings a little bit, but they make a lot of good
But seriously, that means they went through your backlist.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's only the second. I don't know how they went from one of my later, most recent ones to like my very first one is their second book of mine. But hold on. Okay. So it says the title is not well written. And it says, I read another book by this author and liked it a lot, but this writing quality of this, their grammar needs some help. So bear with this poor person. But this writing quality of this book just wasn't very good. Maybe this was her first book. Yes, it was. I don't know, but the dialogue was so choppy and didn't flow. It's never a good thing when you're paying more attention to the bad writing instead of the story. It also wasn't very engaging and was a super boring book. For example, she spent several pages describing how the main character was cleaning the house. There was no action or development of the relationship and characters. This book would be fine as a first novel. that doesn't get published that gives the author writing and story development experience. But as a reader, it just wasn't up to par. Sorry, I will give another book of hers a chance. I did enjoy the first one I read, but I would definitely skip this one. So, but they did make some really good points. That yes, that book did have a lot of those problems. It did get boring in places. It wasn't engaging. She did spend like 3 pages cleaning her house for absolutely no good reason. And so it was just kind of funny. But yeah, I think that's hard for everybody to learn, is just the pacing. It's a pacing thing, but it's also recognizing that there's a fine line between developing your character and building your setting and making it something that actually matters for the story. And that's just something that you learn with experience and with going through editing with a good editor and with a good critique partners. Because sometimes we just get so pulled into telling the story of these characters' lives that it takes a lot of skill to learn what actually matters to the story and to that character's growth.
Yeah. So next time maybe she'll be like cleaning the house so well because she's cleaning up a murder scene and doesn't want anyone to know.
Or she'll clean the house in one sentence and then we're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
See, and I think for me, more microscopic is just transitions within sentences. I was reading one of my first books I put out because I have other books to write in that series. And I was like, okay, let me read the first book again. And the whole time I'm just like wincing at all of my paragraphs because they're just like, it goes from like action, thought, and then action. It just not transition very well, or at least to the point where I'm at now. And I think there's a lot of scene and sequel that goes on in just even like a paragraph that you have to kind of, bring the reader along on this journey, but not jar them to the point where they're like, wait, she was over here and now she's over there. And it's just, too much, I think. So that would be something I noticed as well, as being able to write some inner thought, inner dialogue, and then action, and trying to weave that together to make it feel less. I don't know. I don't like going back and reading what I wrote because I end up hating it. And the whole time being like, I need to change that. I need to change that. So most of the time I just let the story go and I never think about it again and just hope and pray people like it because I don't want to open it up again. So I don't know if you guys have noticed that when you're writing too.
Yeah, I think that learning how to make a story flow, which is kind of what I think you're talking about, just that, smooth, current that you get to flow. And that's just part of, it almost tangible and ephemeral. Like, how do you describe what it is? But there is a growth that happens with an author that sometimes people will say, I don't really know what it was. It just was kind of clunky, or I couldn't get into it, and they can't even describe what it is. And most of the time it's just the author's skill and experience that just grows over time.
I feel like now I mean, I have tons still to learn, but I feel like now, like I can craft a better story. The way I put my sentences together, or how I, weave that inner dialogue inside of it, and trying to and I think when you start out as a writer, you really focus on a lot of things that people tell you, like don't use filler words, make sure you're engaging all these senses. So you go to edit and you get overwhelmed because you're like, well, okay, she walked into a room. What does the room smell like? How does the room feel to her? Where does the light come in? And that's good exercise. Sometimes I think it can be taken to an excess, or be like, you use too many was's and you have to cut those out, or you choose too many filler words and stuff like that. And is that something I go back and I look at with a microscope of my work anymore? No, I send it to my editor and I let her figure out what needs to be taken and not, or she'll clean up my sentences and be like, you kind of worded this wonky. So I switch some words around and it's a lot better. But I think now I can just naturally go into a story a lot better, just naturally adding those kind of elements to my story.
Yeah. I've learned that I like really, really concise, fast-paced stories with bare bones descriptions. And it's not everybody's style. So not every reader is going to like the kind of story that I write.
Mhm.
Some readers really like authors that take their time and give them a lot of description and a lot of backstory and a lot of inner thoughts and all that sort of stuff. And occasionally I will have reviewers say that I didn't spend enough time on this thing or that thing. And so, you know, that's just one of the decisions that we kind of have to make as authors is what are we wanting to create? And if we're okay with our product being a certain thing, even if not everybody's going to like it, then it's okay. And when I first started, I thought I just that it was possible to write a story that was perfect for everybody. And I think that's one of the most important things to learn is that you're never going to write a story that everybody's going to like. And so why not just write the story that's the way you want it to be, you know? Mm-hmm. And the people who are my fans because they like that particular thing. And so I don't need to hold back and change who I am. You know, I like to grow and experiment and, you know, improve, but I don't think I'll ever become a wordy author. I think I'm always going to be really, you know, concise and to the point and get in and get out kind of person.
Yeah,
well, and I think that's
story
how
we care about.
Yeah, I mean, my mom read one of my first books, and she said it reads like a movie, and I think that's how we all are kind of transitioning into. It just reminds me of like when my husband's trying to tell me a story, and I'm like, just get to the point. Like, you don't need to take me on this journey with you. What happened at the end? I don't need to hear anything else. Sometimes my husband can talk a lot, and I'm just like, my brain is gone. Like, kids are screaming in the background. Laundry needs to be done. Just get to the point because I can't handle this. And I think also transition of your life, you know, people who maybe have no kids at home or they're older, they can kind of read these long meandering stories, but I'm just like, get to the kissing because that's all.
So I think several of us were in a class at a conference one time where they were talking about editing and their editing process. And it was basically like the first edit was cut 20,000 words. And the second
first edit was write a love story to your book.
So it was just keep cutting these words and cutting these words. And I thought, I can't cut words from my stories. I don't have enough words as it is. I need to put words in. And
so cut whole scenes. You're talking about choppy, you know, transitions. She'll be like in her home, and the next thing she'll be at her job.
And like, I barely have enough words as it is. I can't take anything out. And so my developmental editor, I'm like, tell me where you need more description and I'll put it in there and I'm not messing with it anywhere else. Like, just tell me where I need it. And that's just how I write. And so it's also a good thing to learn your writing process because some people do naturally write wordy. And they put too much in and then they have to go in and cull it and take parts out and refine it that way. So we're all going to be all over the place, different points on the map, and there's no wrong or right way. It's just you have to learn your way. So,
and it's important to know that your way may not be someone else's way. Because in that class, I did feel really like she was schooling everybody that you need to cut 20,000 words from this book. And like Michelle, I write bare bones, and I always add when I go back and edit because I skip over descriptions and you don't see what's going on without adding that in. And so her way of editing was totally not my way of editing.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that co-writing has taught me is like what my strengths are in writing and then what my weaknesses are. And I was talking with Maggie Dallin about this, and Maggie's like, I have trouble getting them to the next scene. She's like, I will discover 3 chapters into my story that they're still in the same place having the same argument. They're just going back and forth. And so she's like, but you helped me transition them out of that. But I've noticed for me, like I will write dialogue that's not there, but I think it's there because in my head it's there. And so like, I'll just skip over important parts of a conversation because I'm like, but it was already assumed, or they already thought that. And so like Maggie will be like, wait, what? But she didn't say anything. So why is this other one getting mad? Because she didn't actually say anything. So then that made me realize like, oh, okay, maybe I need to go, you know, a little more in depth with my dialogue instead of just be like, well, the reader should just assume that that's what the person had said or that's what the person had meant. And so it's just interesting how you can kind of see like where people are better at things and where where you are better at things, or when they're reading, because in co-writing, we'll write a chapter and then I'll go in with a different color and will add what I think should be in there, and then you can accept or reject it, and it's just interesting to see where things, Lucy McConnell is really good at writing description. She's really good at writing like similes, and things like that into the story that makes it a little more engaging. And so, and I don't write that, but I think she's probably she probably writes more fuller than I do. I write more bare bones like this. So it's just kind of interesting how we add together that becomes this powerhouse of writing, because the two of us have these strengths and then we have these weaknesses that we can help each other with.
So one of the things that I think a lot of new authors struggle with is that they have their characters have repetitive thoughts. And I know I tended to do it when I first started to write, where I felt like I needed to keep giving my character a reason for doing things, or reminding the reader, like, this is why they're feeling this way. This is why they're making this choice. And so they would keep having the same internal thoughts over and over again. And then as a reader, I realized that's really annoying.
Or they say it, or they think it, and then they say it.
Then they think it,
that's
and then they
my
say
problem.
I
remember Victorine telling me that. She's like, they thought that, and then they just said it. Just have them say it. And I catch myself, and I'm always like, Victorine says no.
Well, and that's another interesting point you made that I think is really cool about growing as a writer, is that the things that you learn, you can learn how not to do them. So it's not like you go into the editing on every book and you have to go and fix all the same things that you've always had to fix in all the books before, right? So you learn over time, usually because you get really frustrated with yourself, to stop doing these things that you shouldn't do. And you catch yourself in the act of doing it, like Amy's talking about, like, oh, wait a second, I just did this thing that I'm not supposed to be doing. And you just, don't do it right there. It happens with, learning how to use stronger words, or how not to, like, I say so and just and maybe and possibly at the beginning of sentences all the time. And so now when I type that word, I like, do I really need this word? And it just, sometimes you just kind of have those moments where your brain is like, wait a second, this is a, stop and look at what we're doing word. So.
But sometimes too, though, if that is inhibiting your writing, you just let it go and then you fix it in editing.
Yeah, that's another part of the process thing. If you like to really clean up your prose and your edit, then that's perfectly fine. Some people like to just brain dump, and that's totally fine. I personally don't like to have hard edits, so I try to write a cleaner draft.
I remember when we used to do critique groups with Michelle, and you would always start your first chapter with a summary of what happened in the chapter before, and I'd always be like, "No, you can just delete this whole paragraph. We don't need to know this."
Yes, I do struggle with that, or I did before, especially. But I think what helped me to finally get past that is learning how to write good chapter hooks, so that I'm being propelled by the action into the next chapter. And so I'm not, so many times you're starting with a blank page at the beginning of a new chapter, and you're trying to get into it, and it's hard to get going again at the beginning of a chapter. But if you've written a really strong hook at the end of the last chapter, then you start right where you need to be with the action at the beginning of the next one. So it's kind of helped me get through that hard thing. Another thing I used to do is write really, really good secondary characters that way outshow my main characters. That has been like my thing from the beginning, is that my main characters are not as cool as my secondary characters. So every once in a while, I still have a secondary character that tries to take over the show, but I've learned to make my main characters more interesting.
And it probably comes down to the fact that you've given your main characters more flaws than you did in the past.
Yeah.
Because that's why you like secondary characters, is because they have a lovable flaws.
Yeah. And they're just, I think, more quirky. You just give secondary characters more quirks because you need to describe them as quickly as possible. And somehow your brain works better, or my brain works better when I'm trying to describe a secondary character in 2 sentences than if I'm trying to describe my character over the space of a book. And so I don't know. It's mind game. I'm getting
Mhm.
better at it.
hmm I think for me, one of the things that I struggle with, and this just comes down to planning, is like knowing what day it is. So that, like, especially in YA, like, is it a Saturday? Because they should be at school. And if I have to go back and be like, okay, on this day was Monday, and then this day was Tuesday, and now I'm all the way to Friday, and okay, that's not going to work. Like, that just comes down to planning. But that's what I have struggled with in the past, and I probably still struggle with. So it's probably something I could work with. Or where I have a lot of action that happens in like 2 days, and then they're I like to write really like love stories that happen in like a day. Like this novella I'm doing awesome at because I can just make them fall in love right now. I have a harder time stretching it out. But then again, I hate reading books where it's like 6 months in the whole book because I'm like, well, what have they been doing for the last month? Why weren't they thinking about this person? They should go after them. Why are they just sitting there? So I think I've struggled with that, or having so much happen in the beginning in a short period of time. And then as the story progresses, I feel like I have to rush to get the rest of it told.
I've learned on Scrivener that one thing that helps me keep time straight is I put the date, like on my note cards. I put the date or the day that chapter happens, so that I can always go back and I don't have to begin. I just go back.
I should do that.
Oh, that was a Monday. Oh, that was a Wednesday, and I can track it that way. So
I do write in my notes area on Scrivener, like if I add a character, what their name is, so that I can easily go back and find that name later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I have series that are interconnected and the stories do this at all, I actually have calendars, and I will take the day and I will put which chapters happen from which book on that day, and that way I don't like put a chapter from book 2 that's completely not in alignment with what happened on that day on chapter in the first book. So it's kind of a weird thing, but it helps me to have real days on a real calendar.
Yeah, I've had to do that too.
So it is tricky, and readers catch you on that all the time
because they read them they can read them within a couple days of each other, where it took like me like a whole year to write all those books. And so
yeah.
All right, does anyone have any more? If not, we'll go into the questions. Go ahead, Judy.
I have lots.
Wait, you were perfectly perfect when you first started?
I wasn't. So
what?
Weird. Yeah. So I guess when I first started, I always was like super strict on my idea for the story, and I was going to stick with that idea, and I was going to make all those scenes happen. And so it took me a really long time to write those books because I was always trying to like make things fit and just make everything work lead up to that exact thing that I wanted to happen. And so now as I'm writing, if everything's not leading up to maybe what I had necessarily planned, instead of trying to tweak what I've already written, I just tweak my plan so that I can just keep going and finish the book. So that's something that I've done that has been really good for me. I can let go of those darling scenes, and they may never ever happen, but it's okay. Another thing that I started doing is I actually started setting daily word count goals, where before, like especially the first 5 years, I would just revise all the time and just tweak sentences here and there, and that'd be what I did for my writing session that day. Writing wasn't actually happening. So setting those goals helps me actually like be a little more accountable and keep moving forward. Yeah, I still go back and like revise what I wrote the day before because that gets me into the story and gets me ready to go for the day. But I don't like go all the way back to the beginning. I'll go back just like a chapter and then fix it, and then I move on. So that's been better. And I don't write as many extra scenes as I used to. My first 2 books, they ended up being like 120,000 words for their first drafts. And I had to cut they ended up being like 73,000 words at the end. So I'm not wasting so many words. I'm able to just get the story and the scenes that I need and not throw away all that extra stuff, which is better. And then also just I'm a lot better at just trusting myself to know how to tell a story. And even if I don't necessarily know exactly how everything's going to turn out, I've been able to realize that I'll figure it out when I get there, because I always do. So that's been good for me.
I think for me, and the trusting yourself is kind of a little bit it's trusting that all of the work I've done previously has led up to this kiss scene. Because sometimes it'll be a while since I've written the other stuff, and I'll get to the kiss scene and I'll be really worried. Like, wow, I'll be like, whoa, that happened fast. And then I'm like, but did I do what I was supposed to set up what was going on? And so I've learned to trust myself that it's like, no, it'll be okay. You know what you're doing. This is your billionth book. I don't even know how many books I've written. Like, you know how to set it up. So having that trust is super important, I think.
Yeah. One important lesson I've learned is that, and it's related to what you guys are talking about, is that I need to learn to write with the door shut. I was showing you guys that quote I found the other day. And I'll try and share it in the group sometime. But basically, it's just like, shut the door. Don't write like people are looking over your shoulder. You know, be true to your vision and what you want to do when you're drafting. You know, and I sometimes call that write the story for yourself, and then you can rewrite it for the market. I think there's 2 times to think about the market, and that is in your pre-planning stages and in your like editing and branding stages, right? So the drafting part, I don't think you should worry as much about the market, because hopefully in your planning, you've already built the right key elements in there to make it to market, which we talk a lot about in our book. You know, if you go through those steps to think about what your trope is and you know, all those different things that will make the market happy, then when you sit down, then you can open up your inspiration and creativity and write it and enjoy that process. And then the editing and marketing is all focused back on the readers again. So it's an interesting thing that as a writer, you have to learn to take one hat off and put another one on at different parts of the process. So.
Yeah, I definitely learned that especially with my last book, it's probably a good idea to find out which things readers just really don't want to read, even if you think it's a great story, before you get too attached to it. Yeah, that'd be great to know.
Getting attached to things is really hard.
Yeah. Like, even if it's written to market, there are still some subjects that people don't want to, you know, immerse themselves in. So it's great.
It's tricky. I was going to say one more thing, and then I don't think I have anything else. And that is, I've learned to appreciate good, solid critique and feedback. In the beginning, I would tell myself, yes, I want feedback, but I didn't really. I really just wanted people to tell me how awesome it was. And especially since it was a new book, there was a lot of work to do. I think I cried during the editing phases of my first 3 or 4 books. Like, at some point, I ended up crying over it. And I'm not saying that will never happen again, because it very well might, but I truly do appreciate it when my editors and or critique partners tell me something ahead of time, because at least then I'm able to make a decision about it before it gets to the reviewers and to the readers. And I would hate to just be, you know, self-blinded about my story. And so, you know, I always appreciate, sometimes I get even readers sending me typos that they found in my book, and they're kind of apologetic, and I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to let you know this is there. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, tell me where they are, because I want them gone. I want to get those suckers out of there. So, and part of that learning how to take critique for me has also been building my team. And that's a benefit I have now that I didn't have at the beginning of my writing career. Now I have my developmental editor, and I have my line and copy editor. And honestly, I'm still looking for the perfect proofreader, but I have several people that are good. I don't know if there is a perfect proofreader. Is there a perfect proofreader out there? I don't know. I need one. I need somebody that doesn't get like enmeshed in the story and they're just a robot and they just look at words. Because anyway, but that's the thing, is like the whole process of taking critique and taking feedback and fixing your story and having the right people in place to do that is really important, because my first book, I was in a little writing group here locally in town, and they're all wonderful ladies and I love them and we're still really, really good friends, but none of them were published authors at the time. And so the things that they told me, they were good things, but there was a lot of stuff that they missed and that I could have done better if I had been talking to a professional editor or somebody who knew what they were doing. So I'm really glad that I have the right people on my team now.
Awesome. Victory, do you have anything else you want to add?
I guess the only other thing I see is a huge difference in my early works is I am able to get deeper into point of view on my later works than in my early ones. My early ones were written, and I bet a ton of authors are like this, like a camera above the action, and you're looking down on the action and you're describing everything like that. And I try really hard now to get into the character's head and feel what the character's feeling and write like that. So
awesome. I think for me, it's kind of along the lines of what Michelle was saying, but it was also in terms of how I give feedback has changed a lot since in the beginning. I think I thought I knew a lot about writing at the beginning, and I was very opinionated with people. So if you were my early critique partners and I was mean to you, I apologize. But I have learned how to critique according to a person's writing, than making a person's writing what I think it should be and how I would write the book. If I give opinion, it's like, this happened. I was hoping that this happened. Like, you were taking me along on this journey and then you kind of jarred me a little because I was thinking you were preparing me for this, but you were preparing me for that. So I think there's a way to give critique and there's a way not to give critique. And I have definitely learned. And I think giving critique and getting it is only going to happen if you have experience doing it, because when you are giving critique, or when you're getting critique and you're just getting, this is bad and this is bad and this is bad, you start to feel down on yourself. So, you learn you have to, for every bad thing you say, you have to say a good thing, or you have to start out with, here's the things that I liked about the way you wrote it. Here's the things that I like, because it's much more palatable to get some of that, negative feedback, because you're like, well, okay, good. You at least liked this part. And, I was leading up to this joke and you thought that joke was funny and you pointed out that joke and you liked it. So yay. Now I can listen to the other things. On the other side though, like, I've also learned to be like, it's okay that you don't like that part. I'm keeping it in there. Like, I like that part and that's the way it's going to be. So writing is so personal, but also reading is so personal at that same time, because when you're reading a story, you're taking a lot of your personal background and you're reading it into the characters, and you're kind of making assumptions about the characters as you're reading along. And so to somebody, like Judy said, there's some topics that some people don't like, but then on the flip side, you had a lot of people who were very appreciative of the things that you wrote. So it's just, what do these people, and there's this example, it was at a conference and he said, not every reader is meant for every writer, right? So you may be a writer and you might have made this delicious tuna fish sandwich, right? And it's yummy and you're at a picnic, but then the person coming brings jelly and tuna fish is just not going to work out. And it doesn't mean that reader bringing the jelly was bad or you having the tuna fish was bad. It was just that you guys weren't going to mesh together. So I had to remind myself that, like, not every reader has to like my book. Not every reader has to like me as an author. Some people think I'm boring. Some people think my character's annoying and all these other things. And I'm like, well, you just brought jelly to my tuna fish sandwich party. So joke's on you. You came to the wrong party. So there's a lot more, but I think some of these things are just time is going to, experience and getting the negative review, but then on the opposite end, getting that super positive review that's going to help you keep going. So I think for me, learning to trust myself as a writer, and to trust my book and to like my book and to hope people like it, but to expect that some people aren't going to. And I just, I just never go on Goodreads. That's the thing. I was never a Goodreads person before I was a writer. And I'm like, I'm not going to force myself to be a Goodreads. I get people emailing me, where are you at Goodreads? And I'm like, I don't know. If somebody has to request my book, I don't even know how Goodreads works. So I'm like, sorry, I don't know how Goodreads works. So, but I just don't go on there because people there are mean. I stay away from Goodreads. Okay, so let's go to questions. Danielle Airy asks, how have your processes changed in using critique partners versus alpha readers versus beta readers versus all the different stages of professional editing through the years? Have you been able to pare down on pre-publishing stages as you've become better?
Yeah, I used to. Oh,
no, go ahead.
I'll go. Okay. Yeah, I used to do critique partners and beta readers a lot more than I did. I relied on them a ton. Now I just redo it myself, and then I have a developmental editor that helps me, and then my editor after that. So not as many people looking at it.
I used to run all my stories, at least the first part of it, through critique group, usually with, our critique group from the beginning. And then I would send it out to beta readers. And for one story, I ended up having like 18 beta readers or something like that. And I learned how to merge the documents that they would send me my comments back in. And then I would have like one master document that had comments from 18 people down the sides. And it could be really intense. But I did learn a lot of important lessons from that, because I learned what generally people liked and generally people didn't like. If I had the same people commenting about the same things, or I had one woman who had a more feminist perspective than I do. And it helped me to broaden my understanding of how people would perceive things that I was writing, and how other people would feel about things that I was writing. And I had to self-reflect and figure out what I wanted to do with that information. And that kind of has continued to sort of influence decisions I make from then on. So I don't necessarily at all regret having that many beta readers. I think it was an important part of my education. But I think you do have to be careful about it, because it can be overwhelming. But over time, I found that my time was better served at the point I was as a writer, that now I just use a developmental editor to help me do the work that the beta readers were doing. I found somebody that I really like their instincts, and that person works great with my vision and what I try to write and accomplish. And then, that kind of satisfies that whole purpose of it. And I found
and you have more time to write instead of doing all the other beta reading.
And it's just, when you write quickly and you release quickly, you don't have time to wait for beta readers to get you stuff back, because everybody, they have a life. You can't expect them to turn around your manuscript in a week.
Yeah.
Unless you're paying them.
And then you can, they're still going to have a schedule. Yeah. And, but
it is really helpful in the beginning too. And even doing the beta reading, I learned a ton. Yeah. So if you're at the beginning, definitely do both.
It's hard to find the right editors. And so a lot of times, even if you start by hiring a developmental editor, it's just one person, and you don't necessarily have the experience to know if what they're telling you is right, or if what they're telling you is complete enough, how good they are. And I think the experience of having a lot of feedback in the beginning teaches you, what you need as an author and what you're looking for in an editor, so that when you do go to hire a professional, you have a much better perspective on whether or not they're giving you what you need. So
I agree, yeah.
The editing thing is really tricky. I see so many authors when it's their first book, and they will just spend a lot of money on an expensive editor and then feel like they didn't get back what they paid for. And so I think just learning the process of how to find the right editor and develop a good relationship with them is one of the most important parts of our puzzle that we have to put together. And that's why with our conference that we're putting on, I'm teaching a class with my editor, Ariel Bailey, and we're going to talk a lot about the author-editor relationship and the roles that each of us do, and how you build that through over time. So I'm really looking forward to teaching that class with her. It's tough.
I think for me, when I started realizing that I didn't necessarily need beta readers, and I don't always have a content editor, if I'm writing a more tricky plot line, then I will have a content editor. But I started noticing that they were just nitpicking sentences or perhaps a paragraph or two of a scene. Most of the time it was just like, I don't think they would say this here. And I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, that probably wouldn't. That's when I started realizing I probably don't need a content editor, because I wasn't getting it back and having to spend a lot of time on my manuscript. It was just go through it and delete these couple of sentences and then it was over. That's when I started realizing, okay, I probably don't need these types of, pre-editing readers. And then I will always have an editor, but I have an editor that I trust completely. I send her my manuscript and I tell her, you can go ahead and just make changes. I don't even need to know what changes you made. And so we have a very good trust system. She doesn't make big changes. Or if I'm like, I really, I feel like you might change this, but I want to keep it this way, she's very respectful of that. So then I just have my editor, she's fast, and then I get a proofreader. She just catches the little bits and things in here and there. And then I send it out. So you definitely get to a point as you write more and more books that your pre-editing phase doesn't need as much eyes on it, because you learn to instinctively know what needs to be done. All right. So this one says, hello, writing gals. I have a question for you. I know you aren't supposed to use too many ly adverbs, but I think that sometimes they're needed. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think
do not read. Have you guys ever read How to Train Your Dragon books? Like every sentence has an ly word in it. He sighed drastically. And it's like, you want to read books that have a lot of ly words in it, read those, because you just want to shoot yourself in the head when you read them. They're bad.
So I think the general concept is that you need to try and use stronger verbs, stronger nouns, stronger, adjectives to a point, so that you can avoid having a lot of adverbs in your book.
I think you can use them.
But that's
what still could use them here and there.
I don't ever agree with any rule that says never do anything.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It's all a matter of balance and making the right choice. In fact, it is so funny. I just pulled up on my Pinterest board a pin that I saved. I was going to read it real quick. It says, it's by C.S. Lewis. He says, don't use words too big for the subject. Don't use infinitely when you mean very. Otherwise, you'll have no word left when you want to talk about something really infinite. Mm. And I just loved that point, because so often people say, don't use very, don't use very, don't use very. And I'm not saying the very is a great word, but very is like the evil word, right? As far as adverbs are, like he ran very fast. Well, just say he sprinted, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's a point where if you're always saying your character is sprinting, but then you get to the point where you want him to run faster than sprinting, there's no, what is there beyond sprinting, right? And that's kind of the point that this is making is don't replace adverbs with really strong words that end up stealing the limelight from the big moments, right? So use the appropriate word. Don't just go for the big guns in every single sentence to avoid using adverbs. Just find that's the magic that we're all trying to find as authors, is the right word all the time, the right word. But yeah, don't use infinitely unless you really mean infinitely.
Yeah. And I would just say one more thing about ly words and adverbs and stuff. Just know why the rule is there, and then you can break that rule when it applies, or when you can use one of those words in an effective way. Because if you don't know why that rule exists, then you're going to have weaker writing. You just are. So study it, learn it, figure out why that rule exists, and then you can break it when you need to.
Perfect. Someone asked, do we recommend having critique partners? But I think we already covered that. So yeah, I think that's it for tonight.
Lori asked a good question.
Oh,
I thought it was
how do you feel about going back and fixing your first books, or should we focus on moving forward and getting better with new books?
I always say go forward. When you think about revising books in the past, I saw a really great quote one time, and I can't remember it precisely. I'm the queen of not knowing the actual quote, but it said, "Along that road lies madness," because at what point do you stop going back and fixing your books? Because the book that I wrote last year are better than the books I wrote 8 years ago. But 10 years from now, am I going to want to go back and edit those because they're not as good as where I am 10 years from now? So, we're never going to be able to consistently keep our whole backlist at the same level of writing that we're at because we're constantly progressing. In this last book I just published, I was so excited to get a note from my editor. She just said, "Your writing I could see your growth in this book compared to the first book of yours I edited." And so over that span of time, she could see my growth. And I was like, wow, that's an amazing thing. It's a timeline of my growth as an author. But at no point was I going to go back and say, okay, well, now I'm better, so I'm going to go back and fix my other 30 books. So, and we talked about my first book that's published. That's really not that great, and it's still available on Amazon. And do I think about taking it down? Yes, I do. I'm still debating that. I don't know what exactly I'm going to end up doing that, but it's not going to be rewriting it. It just is not a good use of my time, and time is money. Yeah. And it's also taking away from all the exciting new projects that I have that I still want to do.
Yeah. Or K-dramas that you want to watch.
That too.
All right. I think that is it. We are done for the evening. We will see you in 2 weeks back here, where you have to join a Facebook group to find out what we're going to talk about, because we are going to keep it a secret till then.
That's a great way of saying we don't know.
Way to blow it, Michelle. Everyone
keeping it real.
Interested, and now they're not, because But join us on our Facebook group. We have writing sprints that we participate in. You can ask any questions. We don't discriminate as long as they're on topic and important and don't self-promote. We appreciate you staying up late with us, and we will see you later.